Great. And then, let's see, if we have a quorum with the roll call.
Certainly, starting with Pat Randolph.
Here.
Scott Pinsky.
Here.
Rebecca Suggs.
Here.
Larry Minikis.
Present.
John McCauley.
I'm present.
Bruce Bartell.
Here.
Vice Chair Jim Wagner.
Present.
And Chair Jenny Biggs.
Present.
We have a full quorum today.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and everyone saw the agenda. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Jenny, can't
Yes.
hear you. Oh, there I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay, good, we can hear you.
great.
Any agenda adjustments from out there, or were you just checking audio?
All good.
Yes.
I would like to see core moved before defensible space and local in the report committees, just because I may have to leave a little early.
Okay with everybody?
I move for that change. Second.
You can do a unanimous vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Great. Let's see, open time for public expression?
So moving on to the next agenda item number 4, the open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Community Oversight Committee at this time on matters not currently on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. For those joining us in the remote hybrid environment, please press *9 to raise your hands and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Are there any attendees who would like to provide a public comment? And Madam Chair, there are no hands at this time.
Okay, great, we can go ahead and move to the executive officer's report and hear from Mark Brown.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you know, since it is March, it is work plan development time. So the agenda is packed with ATC meetings, ops committee meetings, updating the board and exec what's going on with the agenda development. Also, Ann leads the charge for agenda development. I work with our finance team to build budget framework, so we're in the process of building the budget framework. As you guys probably remember, we do have the ability to put in a cost of living adjustment to the tax assessment, and it's based on the February CPI, which won't come out until March 15th. So when we build our budget framework, we look at December's and kind of get an idea, and then we be conservative about it. So December was at 2.4, if I remember. So when we built out our budget framework, we estimated 2%. And then when we get the March 15th, we'll get to February, then we'll go up, we can go up to 3, no more than 3. And then let's say, for the sake of argument, it was a 4% CPI, we cap out at 3, and then we can't bank that extra percent for a subsequent year. Like if it was at 2%, we have a percent in the bank. We can't do that. So that's where we're at with the work plan and budget development. Kathleen Cutter and I had the opportunity Monday, so if I was a little bit slow in responding to some of you guys, it's because we were in Santa Barbara at the California Fire Prevention Institute's convention, presenting on Zone Zero in a Box, a 2-hour presentation just to describe what Zone Zero in a Box is about, how we've created it, some of the things that we're having to adjust that we're finding out that just wouldn't work and or wasn't exactly legal. Some of the ideas we had don't fall within legal parameters. it's not that we were trying to do anything nefarious. It's just that one of the idea of a cross subsidy, we're not allowed to do it. Also, we were thinking of having a service charge that would help fund the cross subsidy. But since we as a government entity would be providing the same service a private contractor could, we can't charge for that. So those are the little things that we had to make adjustments to. It was what we made it kind of a QA and interactive brainstorming type forum, because we had a full room with people who are also in this space, and we were able to generate some ideas from them that we might be able to bring back for our program. So we actually have a small list of items that we were able to learn from them, bring back to our program. If you guys watched the board meeting, you heard that we were nominated for and we are receiving what's called a Wildfire Mitigation Award. And it is hosted by the U.S. Association of State Foresters, International Association of Fire Chiefs, National Fire Prevention Association, and U.S. Forest Service. And so they only 2 or 3 organizations a year receive this award. So we feel it's a tremendous honor to be given this award, and we'll Board President Catherine Hilliard and I will go to the ISD WUI conference in Reno at the end of this month to accept the award. So one of the things that the group asked, though, is that we have a comprehensive media campaign to help promote both their organizations and the award, and then also our organization. So you'll be seeing us push out a media campaign and hopefully get in print, radio, and TV to talk about us receiving that award. And then another thing that you're going to be seeing a media campaign for is that we have a successful case of getting someone off the California Fair Plan out in Inverness with our partnership with Mercury. One of our former COC members, I feel comfortable sharing that because she has authorized us to let her, for us to tell her story, Jennifer Howard. And she did it, 1, because she wanted to get off the Fair Plan, but 2, she wanted to go through the mechanisms of transferring from the Fair Plan to Mercury, so that when other people in her community call her up, she could help them through the process, because it took a lot of effort on her part. And Mercury is a huge organization, and there were some people that weren't quite on board with the process yet, but it sounds like they were. But we'll be working on a media campaign for that as well, because we want to well publicize that there is this way to get off the California Fair Plan and onto an admitted carrier. We also want to have this media campaign encourage other insurers to follow Mercury's lead in that same endeavor. So super excited about those 2 successes. And hopefully you'll be seeing stuff in the paper, KCBS, what have you, in the near future. And then fire behavior wise, it's been nice to be getting these occasional sprinkles to help keep the fuel moistures up. We'll see. I really hope we get April rains, to be honest with you. I would be really happy if we get some April rains. And with that, I'll stop and take any questions.
I have a question on the mitigation. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Mitigation award.
congratulations.
Super exciting. And do you know who nominated Marin Wildfire?
Oh, the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association.
Cool. Nice. It's great to see.
Mark,
Yeah.
you said that Jennifer was accepted by Mercury.
Yep.
I'll follow up with her. Thanks.
Okay. I can help too if you have any questions.
Well, the question is, we've been dumped. It's by our insurance company for fire. And so we're having to go out to find a new agent or company. And our current agent is scouring, and she has told us she couldn't find any admitted companies on her first go around who would accept us. So
Yeah.
I'd like to have a little bit of backup to say no.
Yeah. We can definitely point you towards some resources.
Great, thanks.
May or may not help.
Any hands raised for public comment on this item?
There are no hands at this time.
Any other committee points for discussion?
Are there people in the audience?
We do have an audience member. Yes.
I think we can go to the consent calendar. First opportunity for public comment on consent.
If there are any members of the public who would like to comment regarding the consent calendar, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself if you're joining by phone. And there are no hands at this time.
Okay. Do any committee members wish to pull the January, right? Yes, January minutes from the consent calendar? Okay, so I think we can entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
And that is a motion by Vice Chair Wagner with a second from Ray Minigus. All in favor?
Aye.
I would note I wasn't at the meeting, but I watched it, so I feel like I can vote, so aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so motion passes with unanimous vote of all in attendance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, board monitoring committees. We can start with the executive committee.
So I've been monitoring the executive committee, and it's a little bit of a challenge to keep up because they go fast and they cover a lot of information. There was a strategy session at the last meeting that was very informative and went for a fair while actually. But no particular comments to speak of or concerns, just a lot of hard work getting done. I don't know if anybody else is monitoring those.
I think I was watching operations, which resulted probably the strategy session that you watched, and I didn't watch what you were watching. That ended up being the strategic framework, the 7 points that ended up having an 8th point added. So that was the main thing that I was listening to in the operations committee. This sort of strategic guidance that they're then going to provide to the ATC group and have that be the framework that they operate within. It was a great discussion and be straightforward. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing with us what those 8 points were?
Oh, no.
Because
I wouldn't mind, but I can't. I don't have them in front of me. I can go back and look at it, but yeah, I didn't write it.
And I apologize that I'm supposed to be watching operations, I think, because of this list, and I have been otherwise busy and have not watched anything, and I'm going to spend some time in next month catching up on all my watching.
I can give you the 8 items. Item number 1 is continue to house out approach. Number 2 is continue to reduce wildfire risk to communities by providing resources directly to residents for home hardening and defensive space. Number 3, prioritize shaded fuel breaks directly adjacent to communities and explore strategically placed local area treatments informed by pathways modeling. 4, expand the use of prescribed fire in public education and involvement around beneficial fire. 5, continue to prioritize evacuation planning and projects to improve safe and efficient evacuations. 6, partner with insurance companies and Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety to help avoid insurance cancellations and control costs for homeowners. 7 is to increase public education, particularly to new audiences. Stealing Chief Tyler's term, we're great at preaching to the choir. We need to expand the choir. Support activities that fire agencies and inland residents can take, such as home hardening and special space, particularly zone 0 and safe evacuations, and reducing human-caused ignitions. Those were the 7 that we thought we were going to go in and come out with, and then it was proposed for an 8th, and that was to put some emphasis towards decreasing human-caused ignitions. And so it was brought forward by Chief Roman from San Rafael Fire. It was a healthy conversation amongst all of them, and they avoided wordsmithing in the moment, and then we'll wordsmith it and bring it back for full approval.
Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't rattle them off. But yes, no, that sounds right.
So how does that interact with our prior concern with regards to the Rangers being sworn police officers and being 100% reimbursed by Novato and San Rafael?
So that was part of the board meeting where Santa Fe and Novato presented their evidence that there's an 85-15 cost share currently in place, and brought it to the board for their approval that they're comfortable with the 85-15, which there was support for that. And then if they bring forward the mitigation ranger programs in the future, in the work plan, they're going to detail that exact cost share that's going on within the work plan.
Okay, so an 85-15, is that because they're doing other police activities beyond? Because there was a conversation which sounded great, but if you open the kimono up, it was basically when someone gets called off to do something else rather than their time when they're actually in the field dealing with, the homeless and the people that are in those facilities, providing both police and fire type services, and acknowledging the fact that it doesn't really you don't have a lot of conflagrations in the winter. So was there a robust conversation? I should just watch it.
It was robust.
Okay, well, I'm disappointed by that. Yes.
Was that based on history and projected going forward, or is that what we're planning on doing in the future?
It was based on history.
We had numbers for the number.
The issue that we brought was that you had
Thank you.
sworn police officers, fully trained police officers with, guns in the whole 9 yards and the ability to arrest and the like, who were in these arenas, and basically all their time was being paid for by MWPA. And we raised the question as to whether that's really a police service or a fire mitigation service. That was the issue.
But is what they were doing 100%?
Except for, if somebody's called away or they're doing training or this or that, that was reduced from their payroll charge. But fundamentally, you have officers in these locations providing whatever you want to call it, and we were paying for it. And we were troubled by that.
And
I was able to do a ride along with Tom and Novato, and I went into it very skeptical, and I came away from it less skeptical. It was a worthwhile experience, and Novato's pretty open to that. And I think if you want to do that, it would be a good exercise to do.
Well, that's interesting. I would also point that we don't make policies, right? So CFC's job is
You
to,
can observe how the policy is put into effect,
right,
the timesheets, how things are being coded.
yeah, okay, thank you.
So that was the operations committee, but we still have the board of
Yeah,
directors.
I missed the first hour, even though I knew it was starting at 2, creature of habit, I didn't come on till 3. And it was actually very good. You did a strategic planning session kind of after the regular meeting. And a lot of it was for the members, board members, to talk about why they were here, what their background is, and what they'd like to see. And I thought that part was really good. And clearly you're gonna have to do a second session, Mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what came out of it, that you kind of started to go in, but it didn't go far as deep as I think you'd like to go by. I think you went till 6 o'clock, if I recall, something like that, 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock was right. Do you want to add anything to that, Mark?
Well, yeah, we were thinking that we were going to do two 2-hour strategic planning sessions attached to the board meetings. That was based on conversations with board members. They thought that was going to work out. And it passion kicks in.
Yeah.
And it was realized that wasn't going to work. So we're exploring a Saturday meeting for the board to have. And so we're vetting dates now with all the board members. I also felt like, even though most of our board members are actually longtime board members, how the budget gets made is a little bit of a mystery to them. So I actually got up on a whiteboard and walked them through exactly how our budget gets made. So there is a much clearer understanding. And it's something I've done with our employees before. It's something I've done with our finance team. And it might be something that we just get a video camera and do it again at the whiteboard and just have that as a resource for people so that that we can point them to the video. And so it's not, because there's a couple times where I crossed up my thoughts in my head and said the wrong thing in a meeting and had to correct it. So that wouldn't be a good video to show people. But maybe we could have one where we can edit it and make sure that like when I was showing how we come up with the zone percentages, and I used 6% twice when I was supposed to use 6% once and 26% the second time. And I'm like, wait a minute, how'd that come out with the same number? And everyone in the room's going, because you multiplied it by the same number. Oh yeah. So, but I thought it was helpful. Even some of our original board members, I think, walked away with a new understanding on how our budget was built.
Yeah, I'm also monitoring the board meetings and need to learn how to know when they change the start time, because I came in at 3 o'clock as well. But I did get to catch your presentation about the budget, and the tables you showed were very helpful. And I'm going to have to go through that again to help understand it better, but I found that to be very helpful. And then the strategic planning, I also thought was a good start, and sounds like there's going to be good progress there.
You guys all get any emails announcing meetings, because they'll usually have the time on there, right?
Yeah, it had the time. It was just.
Maybe I haven't signed up for the
There's a way to do that. Sure.
Let's
You
connect
also
you
watch
with.
the recording.
Let's connect you with.
That's what I was
Lifetime,
watching.
okay.
Let's connect you with Martina. Make sure you're on the mailing list.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and can I add one thing?
Yes.
So I've been on a couple of field trips on MMWD, and Carl Sanders, who is watershed manager there, I asked him a question. They have done 20,000 pile burns.
Wow.
Yeah, they're doing them. They were doing them this week. They may be doing them today, but
More prescribed burn, I got.
if you go up there on the watershed, just so many places now, they've done a lot of work. I mean, it's still just a drop in the bucket, comparatively speaking, but it's really impressive to see what's going on there, which is connected to everything we're doing here as well. So it's really good.
Any questions from the reports from the committee? And if not, we can go to public comment. Anybody?
There are no hands for public comment at this time.
Okay, so if we have no further discussion, I think we can move on to the annual report committees. And Pat, we can go first with Cora.
Yes. Well, our report was attached to the previous meeting. It wasn't attached to this one, but if I can get the right thing in my hand, I think that our report is fine as it is, except that there are a few, you know how it goes 1, 2, and says what page it was on the work plan. I don't think that's necessary. We just need to come up with a title for each section, and by the next meeting, I will have a title for each section. I like the idea of using findings and recommendations. And I know that's very grand jury-ish, but it lets you know exactly what is it that we found, what did we find, what do we recommend? And it makes it very clear that way. I don't know if other people want to, and I would be happy to, write up some or help other people put the findings and recommendations into theirs. I don't know how other people feel about it.
Deja vu.
Yeah. This one was on the grand jury, so he's not a good witness. But Any other comments on that?
Only question I would have is just from the style perspective, because I did pull the style book out just last week and we were
Yeah.
looking at it.
Yeah.
And we were debating what was a finding, what was a recommendation, and my little pea brain, I finally figured it out. So is the style finding recommendation?
Yeah.
Or finding recommendation?
Well, it's usually, well, you know,
I would
that's,
think that they're tighter together.
yeah, that's,
We learned
that's a
about
good
this
question.
and this is our recommendation. Right?
Yeah,
And if you
I
if
think
you make it that
that's-
way, it makes sense to me what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that is a logical way to do it. I had done things in here with finding, but sometimes the findings sort of split up into multiple ones with one recommendation growing out of those
Finding
findings.
category, okay.
But, you know, I think we can look at that.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Well, just the, when we circulated the templates last year, if we didn't include that specifically, like our section was written without that. So that's the only thing I'm wondering if we want to somehow add that for next year.
Somehow it was in the
It was in your template.
template that I looked at, and I have no idea why it was there. But,
Okay.
I think we can,
Just for consistency
Yeah.
across sections.
no, I think if we do it in one place, we do it everywhere. And you can do it without calling them findings.
Yeah.
And then just have a recommendation for each one, you know, you can say, this is what we, you know, sort of, it's a sort of a summary of, this is the summary of the narrative in a very concrete form. This is what we learned. This is therefore what we recommend.
Yeah, I mean, you guys put a lot of work into this thing, so we should all follow it. It could have called it, instead of findings, you could have said observations, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
observations and recommendations, I didn't understand it until I read it the second time, because I was a little, we were getting mixed up in terms of where we put them, but.
And that's, I wouldn't mind calling them observations.
Rebecca and I have conclusions in ours, so.
Wanna say
Yeah.
it could be called conclusions, right?
I think we can, when we get all of them, we can level, as long as
We
people are
can-
comfortable with the sort
Yeah.
of general spirit of it, I think when we get them all together, then we can do some level setting across.
Yeah.
Without taking too much liberty.
And for what it's worth, I know a few people on the Sonoma County Measure H COC, and they're using a similar approach for findings and using findings and recommendations.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Anybody else comments?
So you're basically ready to go once you put the headings in and you'll be complete by next
Yeah.
month? Great.
I think we will be. I mean, I can be complete by day after tomorrow.
That's exciting. Then
So
we need
your-
champagne at the
So
next
your
meeting.
core materials have actual numbers in it, not budget, because we were always confused about that. We speak about actuals, not about budgets, right?
Well, we do say the amount that they were budgeted, just because that was very easy to find. Maybe you and I can talk and we can,
Well, I think what the public should understand is how we spent the money. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, not necessarily, no, that's not important.
This makes me sick. You wanna do that.
He's allowed to have his phone on ring today.
I'm trying to be a granddad again. So, yeah, yeah. Budgets are just at the beginning what we hope for. What the public needs to know is how we spent the money, because you can spend the money way different than budgets. So it's important that our recommendations and our discussion focuses on.
do you have the final numbers?
Yeah. Right,
Okay.
because otherwise we could have done this at the beginning. I mean, we could do next year's now based on budget, right?
Yeah.
So budget doesn't matter, it's only actual that matters, but there was some
Well, we
confusion.
can't quite do it yet. We have to wait. till
I'm making a
May.
joke, but the point is, I just want to make sure we're all focused on.
Yeah.
On
Expenditures.
expenditures,
Mhm.
actuals.
And those numbers come from,
Mark.
Okay.
We will get them from Mark.
and what about both of those, putting in budgeted some, some actually spent. And then,
I frankly think budget's just a confusing element. I think if you're sending, honest in my view, you're sending a report to the public, just tell them what we did.
well, but it might be interesting to the public to know, well, this was budgeted for 100,000 and 200,000 was spent, or 50,000 was spent. I don't know. I mean,
Well, that gets heavy into management, so you could go that route, but if you saw something shockingly different and it quirked, it piqued your interest into why something was so over or under budget, but we're not management. We're just talking about what was done. That's kind of a distinction. So I wouldn't do budget everywhere. Maybe something jumps out at you, but I think fundamentally what we want to report is what actually happened. That's what we're telling the public.
Maybe in our processes, we look at what's budgeted and whether there's a big discrepancy between what was actually spent.
Right.
And then it would make it into our report.
If it's a big
It's
enough
not
gap,
just
one way or another.
Sort of. I mean, to really kind of push back on it a little bit, at the beginning of a period, you have a budget for something. And then over the course of the year, something dramatic happens and you say, okay, we're dumping the budget. And with approval, we're going to do something completely different. Do we need to get into all that detail as long as we don't tell the public what we actually did? I think given that it's going to be a one quick read, I think actual is like on a 10 scale, like a 10, and budget's like a 2.
Okay.
So that's just my reaction. That's how I would look at it.
Unless there were consistent, like if you saw every year
Yeah.
crazy deltas between budgets and actuals,
Yeah,
but if it's,
right.
okay.
Right, if they're always way over, but then again, on the other hand, we also have the control of, we only have so much money to spend, we have to follow our 20/20/60 and our 80, all those different, it's really complicated. So with all that complexity that's already inside of it, it's a very complicated organization, right?
Yeah.
I think actuals is what we should speak to, personally.
Adherence to budget can be a good thing in that they're predicting well. And it can also be a bad thing. They're failing to react to changing
Yeah,
circumstances.
it's adaptive management,
Right.
So just a question on your point, and I see what you're saying, and I think it's very important, but we as a committee don't get to see numbers until early in the year when it's just budget. And I'm not sure what it's usually like, but this year, we're just now getting actuals. So we'll have less time to scrutinize the actuals than the budget.
That is correct, but what we want to focus on is the actuals. And it is likely that when we get to the local report, I'm just going to tell you, I have a continued agita about the length of time it's taken to get us done. And I really have a problem with how long it's taken to get the books closed. And so the budget's at the beginning of the year, theoretically, even before the year starts. And it's just it's a work plan. Right, that's like every corporation always has budgets, but what really matters is what's your PE, what actually happened at the end. So I think actual is much more important. And we can't really report until we have actuals because we're gonna tell the public how the money was spent, right? Who cares what the budget is? Budgets is like, oh, we're gonna have, happiness everywhere, but then what really counts is what do you do with it? Person with the money spent. So actuals to me is like what counts.
I see the point, and I'll say one more thing and I'll drop it.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't look at anything but actuals or look at budgets as well.
Well, when we tried to jumpstart this process because in year one, it took us the whole year to get a report out, right? So the whole idea of this last cycle, once we finished the last audit, which Oversight Committee review, which took freaking forever. It was like 10 months after the end of the year, kind of ridiculous, a long period of time. We said, let's start right away and use our budget to guide where we're going. Because like in core, for instance, you can really get a lot of work done early in the start, right? And then, but you gotta know what actually happened before you can comment. So you can't issue a report before the end of the year, right? And the question is how soon after the end of the year can you get the report out? And that is a question of how fast the actuals were brought to you.
Well, to me, I think that you can have everything written with plugging in the actual.
Exactly, that was our goal. That was what our goal was, yeah.
And I think we all have that, yeah.
And then I think that you know, if you can get the actuals by September, October, then we can have it all done.
Right, exactly. Ding, ding, ding. That was our hope.
In the previous years with the core, we had that wrapped up by October easily. The transition of the finance team has put a kink in that. It was wrapping up the D-Space and local that typically took us longer, but I believe we'll have an improved financial process next year.
So this year was a slow.
Well, but we still need the
Yeah.
actual
Can you tell me
numbers
which
this
projects
year.
you're looking at, and I can get that for you?
Well, we're looking at all the core.
Yeah, that makes total sense, right? The core, these guys cut the checks in core, right? You know, I mean, you guys have 100% control over core. You're hiring everybody. This is all inside of your house, right? And if you mind, I'm just going to leak into where we are with D-Space. With the others, with D-Space and local, the money just goes straight out, right? It's automatic, right? 20 and 20 based on the checks coming in, but you're relying on them to report back to you. And this is a higher risk environment from the perspective of the public to make sure that the monies that are outside of your direct control aren't being, wasted or, not moved correctly. So the burden on this complex organization is for MWPA to have good oversight into what people are doing and relative comfort over that. And one of our findings we're going to have a hard time on in the D-Space is that one of our big jurisdictions, which is the county, is using a January through December reporting period. We're on a June reporting period. To me, that's like, so we're still pursuing this. I just sent an email to poor Mark this morning on this topic, but I believe we'll have further findings in this area, but it just reemphasizes the importance of actual, and Pat, you said it perfectly. You go in on core, early on you understand what you're doing, you raise your questions there, and then you get to the end, you make sure you spent it how you spent it, right? So, it really can give you a jump start if you get the actual numbers quick enough. Right? So.
I volunteer to work on core forever.
Should we be dividing our process up and do like a core? Here's how the year went, and then, okay, now we're gonna wait a couple of months until we have local and just go issue the report for core early, not early, but on time, and then do a separate one for local and D-Space?
Not this year, but in the future.
My reaction would be.
Not this year.
My reaction would be that, an interesting idea, my reaction would be that I, as a member of the public, I don't have enough of bandwidth interest in read more than one report. And if you're carving the report up because it takes forever to do parts of it, that strikes me as odd,
On that point, I'm actually curious what the download click rates are for the PDFs on the website.
Well, that's, yeah, right.
We could track that.
That was pessimistic, Rebecca.
But it's still important what we're doing.
Yeah.
So even though we have police officers in
Walking
Does
the
any-
hills of San Rafael.
I know you needed to wrap up on core. Does anybody have anything else on core? And then you had gotten into D-Space.
I can
Do you
just
wanna
really
add?
finish D-Space in just a couple of minutes
Sure.
beyond what we already did and started working on a little bit. We have some additional questions that we're following up on. I've already kind of raised that one question that we're working on, but now that we have the numbers, we're kind of running through the numbers and there's some things popping out with them. We are coordinating across your concept, because you said within core there's some money was spent on D-Space, and we kind of said, riddle me this, why does that happen? And we are getting some more information on that, so we'll take your lead and conclude on that in our section. And is there anything else you want to add for what we're doing?
No.
So then that just leaves local, and Rebecca and I, no changes to ours from what you all saw last time around. We've got the placeholder for the rollover number, and that's it. So we should hopefully are ready to go at the end of, by the time we have our next meeting.
And local, as I recall from prior reports, we'll have the actuals.
Did I send you that document?
I think you did, but we haven't put it.
Double check.
Yeah.
And as I recall, we actually had details of what the local spends were
Yeah.
in the ones that we looked at, right?
Yeah.
We look at 3 or 5, I think.
And I will be calling you tomorrow to get the,
Friday may be better.
yes, sir, I'll call you on Friday.
Exec committee meeting,
Mhm.
other things.
Okay.
You
So,
wanna schedule a call while we're out there? Yeah, if you want me on that one,
Well, we can
we can
do
do
it
it.
off.
Okay.
later, okay. Any public comment on this item?
There are no hands at this time.
Okay, so if no further discussion, I think we can move on to the information item, which is the tenure piece, Mark, the terms, renewals, expirations.
And so each of you should have this is our current table that we have. It shows our members when their terms end and what their current work plan assignments were, or the 24-25 work plan assignments were, and then also their committee observations. So it's an opportunity for you guys to adjust as needed. One of the things that we wouldn't be able to take action on it because it's one of your bylaws of statements. It's not stated in your bylaws whether or not someone who comes in mid-term, if that counts as a full term or not. And it's your bylaws that say that you could be a maximum of 2 terms. Your bylaws were created by you. This is not something that we would have to go to the board for. So at a future meeting, you guys probably should include an agenda item to visit those bylaws and decide how you want to interpret a midterm arrival, because actually 2 of our members are midterm arrivals.
So that's to say that somebody comes in July.
We'll use John as an example. John came in, Max Pere was voted onto the city council, so he left. John came in the middle of his term, and then, so that was half a term. Then John put his name in for a full term. So if you treat John's half term as a full term, then John can't re-up. If you treat if you don't treat
Why am I
John's,
smiling?
It's like, please, 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 yeah.
if you don't treat John's term as a full term, then he can re-up.
So we have a bunch of people dropping in 26. Can you make this, put a little more, one more bit of information on there? So you can say 1.5 terms for me and 1 term, like Jim is, you're on your first term, right? Yeah. So you might say first term and then
Yeah, so
1.5 term or term for the short term or something like that.
I'll put it somewhere between, right next to where term ends. I'll either put it before or after.
Right. So we can get a sense for what's the tea leaves look like, right? Because at the end of the second term, you're done, right? The second full term, you're done.
And what are you all looking at?
Oh, I'll send it to you, Rebecca. Sorry about that.
Okay,
I'll send it to you. Martina's going to send it to you now.
great, thanks.
I'm halfway through.
It's a spreadsheet you've seen before, though.
So you're like me,
That's,
you're like me,
Yeah,
It's got
I think
the,
Michael
Oh, the assignments on it?
1.5.
yes, that one.
Yeah, same.
Got, okay.
Term starting July.
Yes.
When do the terms start?
COC terms actually start in January.
They start in January, yeah, right, yeah, they're starting, yeah, right.
Speaking of term starting, did you guys all already say hello to Bruce? And I didn't, it's so hi, Bruce.
Last meeting.
Well, before the meeting got started, we have an assignment for you. You're going to be starting a new taxpayer group and assigning yourself here.
She's not laughing.
Martina, do we have anybody from the public left on the call?
It's
We
still
do,
tape
yes.
recorded.
I'll comment later, Bruce.
Meet you at the bar.
Okay, so we just had that request for one additional column that says how many terms people have served, but does this help with the questions that we had?
I know that I'm done with this year.
So you're at the end of your second.
Yes, I drew the 3-year straw,
On the first round, right?
and I am now will have been here when I finish my term 6 years.
Wow.
Thank you, Pat.
As a reminder, when the first nine came on, 3 drew straws for a 1-year term for the first term, 3 drew straws
Got
for a
it, so it'd be
2-year.
staggered, yeah,
So Pat was one of the 3-year term peeps.
got it.
Larry was 2 and a 3, right?
So what became of the discussion about changing?
Yeah, half, how do we wanna move forward on this question of
You-
half?
You'll need to have, to agendize, changing the bylaws.
Okay,
We
Do
can't
you
talk
all-
about it without it being on the agenda.
okay, do you all want this, I guess we aren't on the agenda, future agenda items, or hold that thought?
Just a point to make, I just did a quick addition of that column that Mark's gonna formally add, but if Jenny is a 1 or 2, depending on how we characterize the half-termers, she's also down and this would be her last term if we count it as a full term.
So it'd be 27, the end of 27 for her. Yeah, but this would be her last term, yes.
Yes.
Whereas you're in your first term,
Right.
but you were a full termer.
Just reach out to another person. I'm trying.
Okay, so I think we can move on to the agenda, future agenda. Any other discussion on this one?
Let me just ask for clarification, the community-based organization column that's vacant, does anyone have any insight into how broadly the topics of such groups could
Well,
be?
It could be the Marin Coalition, it could be the League of Women Voters, it could be,
The Canal Alliance, North Marin Community Services, any
Yeah,
of
a
those.
lot of things.
All right, so it's
Pretty,
very
pretty
broad.
flexible.
Okay, because if that's the case, there's so many organizations in Marin, it shouldn't be that hard to identify someone.
Well, someone has some sort of connection to what we're doing here too, you think.
Well, in theory,
they
yeah.
can learn, yeah.
So how's it gone thus far? Since it sounds like it's so easy.
That's how it's gone.
Yeah, you've reached out to a lot of different people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll continue though.
Just give us some color, like how many different community organizations have you talked
Upwards of 10.
to? Just curious.
That you've already,
Do churches count as community-based organizations?
does what?
Churches.
If God wills it.
I can't see why it wouldn't.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it would be nice to have a West Marin organization here, but it's difficult, it's just difficult.
Yes.
I'm West Marin.
Oh, you are, that's right, sorry.
Would churches get us in trouble about the separation of church and state?
I don't wanna get us in trouble. In heaven or otherwise.
That'll be our guess.
Okay, anything else, or should we move to if we need to agendize this topic, that's one future agenda item, to put this on and the consideration of amending the bylaws.
And the bylaws now say what? As far as-
They don't,
It simply says 2 terms. It doesn't
Okay, so it's
define.
So
silent
it's
as to a
refining-
partial term.
Refining
Yes.
or clarifying the bylaws.
So it would be an additional term in the bylaws to treat a partial term. How
So
that
can
would
we
be treated.
just state for the minutes specifically what the requests are for the future items?
To make a decision as to the definition of a term and how it relates to a partial term
Within the bylaws.
within the
And the
bylaws.
bylaws.
And does our, the thing we're doing this year about extending, because we haven't finished the report, should that get written in somewhere?
Right in the bylaws, a shadow period.
Do we need to?
Do we?
That's my question. Do we need to, or can we just,
Well, we did that by action last time.
right, but not as a bylaw? matter.
But we set our own I'm not aware, we set our own bylaws, so.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
And when we did it for this time, did we just say we're here until the report's done? Or,
If you're willing to serve,
It was for the report.
yeah, for the report.
And if you're willing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was both.
It was, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I think we can just, for the agenda item, clarify the definition of the term in our bylaws. Okay, great. Any other agenda items?
Just want to clarify that our next meeting is March 25th, is that correct?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Do you all want to stick with that? I mean, here we are, March 4th.
Let's get this dang thing done. Is my recommendation.
To me, the 25th is just fine.
Okay.
And we hopefully can
Could we
this
get
out the
drafts in to Martina before, like the week before the 25th then, so that those can be
door.
circulated?
Yes,
Drafts by the
I would,
18th.
The 18th, drafts to Martina by the 18th, so that there are attachments in the thing and we're looking at final approval, subject to, refinements when we bring it all together, but nothing content.
write that down and remind me, Scott.
Got it.
And just, March 25th is the day that we'll be receiving the award in Reno, so I will not be here, but I am not a requirement for you guys to have a meeting.
Okay.
But we'll miss you.
Yes,
And
we
then
will cheer you as we sit here.
Put some bets down for us.
So just a reminder,
I'm not again.
just a reminder, we had a really significant difficulty last time. The two of us worked really hard on it at the very end with regards to the financial report. Because the financial report didn't hang together. We ran around. And so, Mark, the way it's supposed to work is that the financial report just jumps out at you and just ties to the audited financials and to the books and records, and it's an easy squeezy and everything's supposed to tie, right? Especially the roll forward. That was our issue with regards to the roll forward. So before the 18th, are you going to be able to send something to us? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, to anybody, so anybody can individually ask questions without having a Brown Act problem. Because some of us will probably look at it closer than others of us. This is the nature of things, right?
Yes.
So, okay. And it's critical that it rolls tight.
On my internal task list, that's my Friday job this week.
Okay, all right.
And those drafts would need to be in by the 18th because the agenda has to be posted by the 20th. So if you have final changes or last minute edits, once we get to Friday morning, it won't be possible to change it on the agenda.
However, you don't have to have the actual report. So I understand the Brown Act. You can say we're going to talk about this and you can add something later and change it later. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
If you must.
If you must, but but again.
Let's aim. to
Yeah,
get there.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Anything else?
Adjourned.
I think we can adjourn.
The best agenda item.
Oh, cool.
Your favorite? Bye, Rebecca. Thank you.